All right, but I'll go ahead and get started. So I'm excited to share, a little bit about my journey with you today. I'm currently a senior product designer, but my path really has not really been straightforward. I have a background in graphic design, marketing. I studied PR and advertising in school, and I minored in graphic design. And honestly, I didn't really feel comfortable enough like majoring in graphic design at the time. And so during college, I interned at all of these different places, and I was trying out all of these different roles to see what would fit. I kind of thought I would end up in the music industry and went down this whole path. And then suddenly, a couple years in, worked at a bunch of different agencies, found myself kind of reaching burnout and realized that I needed to kind of go off, explore. And I met some people doing user experience design and product management and software engineering. And I started to spend some time exploring the world of tech. And that's how I suddenly ended up in a boot camp. And then all of a sudden, here we are. Now I've been doing UX for a few years now. And so, yeah, I'm ready to get started. So UX design is a lot more than what the bootcamp ads kind of will lead you to believe. It pays well, but it's a very unique role where you'll be at the intersection of product, tech, business, and the customer. And you'll need to collaborate and communicate with a lot of people, probably more than most jobs. It's really a mix of many skills in one role, and you'll be doing a lot of deep thinking. It's challenging, it's incredibly rewarding, but it's definitely not for the faint-hearted. So hopefully you're ready to dive in. So in this presentation, I'm going to explore kind of how designers solve problems. We'll help you determine if UX is the right fit for you, identify, your best learning environment. We'll also cover essential preparation for boot camps, schooling, things like that, how to work hard while you're in school, and creating a portfolio that helps you land that job. So getting started, design is a lot of things. Designers were seen as magical problem solvers, unicorns, pixel pushing wizards, but what does that really mean? Is design just another form of art? While both UX design and art are creative fields, UX design is really about solving practical problems and improving usability. Art, on the other hand, is more about personal expression. They're both creative fields, but their approaches are quite different. So at its core, digital product design is all about solving problems with formal solutions. Just looking at the Wikipedia definition, it's an iterative process where designers identify problems, they come up with the best solutions and launch them to market. And digital product design is really just kind of one of those subsets of the larger field of product design. So you can think of it like this, interior designers solve visual and spatial problems. Physical product designers create things we touch and feel, and service designers improve workflows and environments. And user experience digital designers or human-computer interaction designers are solving problems in digital spaces, and they focus on how we interact with technology. They're the ones kind of behind the scenes at places like Meta, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, and pretty much every app and website that you've probably ever touched. And if they do their job well, you're going to hardly notice that they're there. So does that mean that you need to read, The Design of Everyday Things by Donald Norman to start a career in UX? I would say not necessarily, but I would say it's important to have a high-level idea of what design is and what all of those paths look like so that you can really understand where your journey will really take you. I recommend picking up a book or any book, diving into the first few chapters, and that can really kind of help you understand if this is really the right field for you. And, UX design is complex, so don't be too hard on yourself as you go through the learning process. So I'll be using UX and digital product design pretty interchangeably throughout this presentation. So you can kind of assume I'm kind of talking about the same role. As for titles and things like that, the industry is shifting towards product design. You'll still see UX. At the end of the day, I think they're relatively similar. It's very much the person designing the user experience and thinking through that strategy. So at this point in your journey, you kind of want to understand probably what a day in the life is like for a UX designer. Every day can look wildly different. And, you want to like what you do all day. So it's important to kind of understand what are the things that a UX designer is doing, in their 8 hours each day. So they're trying to figure out how to make stuff work. They're trying to solve these problems. They're experts at kind of compromising between everyone's differing opinions and options to really assemble the interface that you interact with every single day. So some days I'm working with my product manager to define hypotheses, figuring out how we tell stories and communicate the work that we're doing back up to stakeholders. Some days I'm really just deep in Figma, just wireframing and exploring and looking at inspiration and just kind of figuring out how many How many different ideas can I come up with? Some days I'm deep in data and I'm like working with our data team and really trying to understand, why are the numbers going this way? Why are people going this way? Why are they clicking on this thing, et cetera, et cetera. And really kind of figuring out how our work dives back into the business. And then some days I'm deep in user behavior. I'm doing user research, customer studies, interviews. And then other days it's with engineers. I mean, the list is kind of endless, but hopefully this is kind of a good start to give you an idea of what designers do all day. So what about UX designer job descriptions, which I'm sure plenty of you have been like scouring LinkedIn and all of those places, looking at jobs, trying to understand, what does all this stuff mean? So I kind of pulled a few like common phrases that I tend to see in job descriptions to kind of help you understand what people are saying when they write these things, because it's not really super clear. So if someone's like, I want you to translate concepts into user flows, wireframes, mockups, and prototypes that lead to really intuitive user experiences. Really, it's really just like, really, how are you going to approach making our experience better so that more people do the thing that we want to do, so that our money goes, that we get more revenue? That's like essentially what they're looking for. They're looking for someone to kind of like piece it all together from like the ideation stage to all the way, working with engineering to get it built out, and that they can connect it back to their business metrics and be able to say, look at the, because we made these changes into the user experience, we saw, these improvements in our overall KPIs. And so you'll do like concept testing, usability testing, experiments. It's up to the designer to kind of approach and, propose what they think are the best methodologies to get the team to that success. So for, finding creative ways to solve UX problems, that can mean like people come to you with design problems, or, you help guide them where things go. They help you kind of, they're like, hey, I'm trying to solve this thing where I need to put all this information on the page. How can I organize it so, it performs well? If you're working on a project, sometimes, insights are needed, and you'll plan and conduct research and things like that to help you get those answers. And then when it comes to collaborating and working with stakeholders, you're becoming buddy-buddy with your product managers and your engineering leads, because the closer relationships that you have with them, the more you're working as a team of really thinking through the design, the engineering, and the product side of things to really create really strong product and tell a really strong story. And UX designers are chatting with pretty much everyone at the company. It depends on your role and what area you're focusing on, but you're chatting with customer service people, you're chatting with sales people, people on the business side of things, pretty much everyone. Your design touches everything, because at the end of the day, what you're touching what the actual experience is. And this also means, how you present your work back to leaders and other teammates, and defending your design decisions and things like that. So next up for matching. So, probably thinking now, you're probably like, am I meant to be a designer? I'm not sure. Like, it's a tough role. The job market is tough, and that's, besides some other reasons outside of our control, with the economy, design is a tough role. The boot camps can kind of make it seem like it's effortless. They might, lead you in with all this messaging that you can get, you can get a career in a really short amount of time, but it's hard work. And, it's true maybe for some people, depending on their experience, but it's really important to kind of think through, what is your past experience? What are your goals? What are your skill sets? What are your strengths? And, as with any career, even if you've worked in other fields, you will kind of start at the bottom and work your way up, and it's hard work. But design is a creative field. It's first and foremost a creative field, but it's a logical, analytical, and strategically creative field at its core too. And those who thrive, I think, are the ones who are creative and strategic at their core. UX combines so many skills in one job, and that's can kind of be why these roles are paid, maybe more than graphic designer counterparts, or those who might sit on marketing teams as opposed to product and tech teams. So thinking, a little bit further about your strengths, like the most important thing to really understand is, what are you good at? What do you like to do? What do you find comes easy to you, naturally to you, all of those things. I took the Clifton Strengths Finder quiz, and I took, a 1,000,001 personality quizzes, as I'm sure a lot of us have. And that really helps you understand, how does your mind work? Where do you find yourself gravitating towards, what brings you joy versus what doesn't bring you joy? And that can really help you understand, do my skill sets and strengths match what is going to be, needed to be a UX designer? First and foremost, strategy is super important. You think ahead, you plan effectively for user needs and business goals. You're analytical and you're interpreting data and user feedback to inform your design decisions. There's a huge amount of empathy. You want to understand users' emotions and motivations to create design decisions that really resonate. So you're really pairing motivation and empathy with data and metrics to produce really strong user experiences. And then you're clearly conveying all of those ideas and, proving to people that you know what you're talking about, essentially. So if you've seen like the term, full stack designer, some key skills that I, at least, in my opinion, what I see in full stack designers is they cover a pretty wide breadth of the skills that, you would think for someone in the product design space. There's the knowledge of visual design principles. And, especially, if you're creating what people are visually seeing and reacting to, this is really, really important. Doesn't mean necessarily, making logos and doing branding and design, and all of those things, but it's knowing how to work within all of those things to put together an interface and experience that performs really well. It's really just the key, like you're considering the visual design principles when you're, working through the design of all of your user experiences. The intersection of design with coding and development, at the end of the day, designs Figma is just a design tool. It's not the thing that people actually touch and interact with. There's the whole other part of it of working with engineering and understanding how your work comes to life, understanding how engineers and developers and how they're going to approach your design and how they're going to approach building it from a technology perspective, and understanding, understanding like logic and just understanding all the different things that come into play so that what you're designing not only is feasible within, relative timeframes or feasible within certain, technology stacks that the team is using, but are also kind of like pushing the team as well to improve the experience and not necessarily like limit yourself just because of, what the team has. And really, you're just collaborating with engineers all the time. They're constantly asking you questions. So the more that you understand their role and how technology and design intersect together, the stronger your designs end up being. Then the whole other side of it is the research and the user psychology side of it. It's really understanding how users think, behave, and so you can design for them strategically and successfully. So you don't necessarily need to be the one conducting all the research projects. You might be at a team where there's UX researchers, but it's critical that you could, do insights gathering, thematic analysis, and really help people take a lot of content and a lot of feedback and really understand like what are the key takeaways and how can we use these to drive our design decisions and hit our business goals. And then lastly, really writing and communication, design tools proficiency, really just having, being able to like communicate really well, use tools efficiently. Tools are always changing. So it's less of you need to be a Figma expert, in 5 years, it could be a new tool, who knows? It's really just being able to be quick and efficient and strategic with your time and communicating that out really effectively. And more often than not, it's Figma, since that tends to be the tool of choice. Next is finding your transferable skills. So everyone has them, but they're not all equal. So it's important to really kind of like lean on the ones you have and understand where your gaps are and focus and understand where you need to put more of your attention. And so at this point, you're kind of like taking a step back and you're thinking about your background and everything that you've been doing up from, college up until now, up until, what you're doing right now. And so you're going to think about what you've done in the past, what you do today, the pros and cons, and you'll want to identify, what are your transferable skills and gaps so you can really understand where to go from here. And so there's a couple different, like more often than not, you'll have the different types of people kind of transitioning into UX. You might have some sort of graphic design background or just really any sort of kind of other similar design background, and you're starting to move into the tech space. You might be working in engineering or data and have some sort of technical background. You work in research and psychology, or you have a background completely unrelated. I've seen people like they're teachers, accountants, actors, people who have wildly different experiences come to these boot camps and try to figure out, is UX right for me? So if you have a design background, you have a huge leg up. Obviously, you have already have the experience of using design tools and visual design principles. Where your knowledge gaps might be is probably the technology side of things, maybe some of the user psychology side of things. And so it's really thinking through what your background is and where those gaps are. And if you're someone who's like coming in from a completely different background, maybe you don't use a computer much at your job today, and this is where you can take into consideration, okay, I might need more time to catch up than maybe someone who has a graphic design background. And that's where you can really kind of not put too much pressure on yourself to kind of like go at lightning speed as maybe some other students in your boot camp, knowing that everyone is coming from different backgrounds and has different levels of experience and different gaps to fill to kind of meet that junior level design standard. All right, made it this far, you should have a pretty clear idea of what companies are expecting from a user experience designer, at least at a high level. You've probably already considered and you've probably started to think through, what are my transferable skills? Is this something that I want to do and explore further? You don't necessarily just want to pick a boot camp or a school just yet. There's still a little bit more to dig into. First things first, you want to identify what your learning style is, because more often than not, if you pick a boot camp before you've really thought through what your learning style is, you might be going down boot camp that isn't going to necessarily work best for you. If you're a visual learner, you learn effectively from presentations, YouTube videos, podcasts, watching people do it, etc. If you're a hands-on learner, you probably have to do it yourself to get it. You want to kind of be doing it on the go as someone explains it, or immediately after a lesson for it to click. And if you're someone who's just really a self-learner, you probably fall into one of the above two buckets. And you probably don't need a teacher or mentor to support you throughout your learning process. You're more independently motivated to get yourself where you want to go. Once you've outlined what your learning style is, that can really help you narrow down your schooling choices even further. But on the other side of things, obviously, is cost. So everyone has a budget. If it's $0, self-learning might be your only path forward, and that's totally okay. So many people do it and have found success that way. But it's totally reasonable to want help, to put money towards it, and to, carve out a little bit of a budget to give yourself some structure. And budget can be anything. It could be anywhere from a few $100, and that's, like your Google UX courses, Udemy courses, things like that. Or you start to go into the, higher budget range, and that's where you start to go to Designlab and some of the other boot camps like that. Now, do you need to kind of shovel out tens of thousands of dollars and go to university? Probably not. Could you? Totally. There's always a happy medium for everyone. And so it really just takes research to really figure out what that path is. And there's plenty of sites out there that rate the schools, where people write reviews, so you can do that digging. And it's important to call the admissions team, get the syllabi and really understand, what is it that I'm going to learn at this school, and is it going to meet my goals? Oops, sorry. I lost my page. Okay. All right. So now you have an idea of budget, you have an idea of your learning style. Now you're weighing the pros and cons. So really at a high level, if you're looking at, pros and cons here, obviously with boot camps, you're getting that hands-on practice with flexible learning options, but it can be expensive. So you're weighing all of these pros and cons to really kind of decide what is best for you. And it's not an easy decision. It takes time for everyone. And it's something that I would never encourage anyone to rush through. If you need to take the time to really think through these things and do the research, if you need to put your spreadsheet together, I had a Google spreadsheet of all my schools and all my pros and cons, whatever you need to kind of help you pick the right path, it's worth the time to put in that effort. All right, now preparing. Now, don't go into the boot camp blind. It's very, very easy to just be like, the boot camp will just tell me what to do. In a sense, yes, but you need to put just as much into it as you're going to get out of it, because it can be incredibly challenging to dive into a boot camp and just there's so much thrown at you. And so the more preparation that you can do on your own, and the more you can spend, outside of the boot camp learning and learning in other areas, will really help create a very well-rounded, educational framework for you. All right, so if you're like preparing, some of the key things that you really should be doing: one, make sure your computer can handle it. And this is one of those things where it can be a little daunting if you're not entirely sure. Just show up to Best Buy and say, hey, I need to use Figma and I need to use this. And someone should very easily kind of guide you to all the different computer options that you have available. Next thing you want to do is choosing your design tool. And you can always start with Figma for simplicity. It tends to be industry standard, but it's always up to you. Then you want to download it, make sure you have it installed and have it on your phone. The key thing to having Figma on your phone means you are always seeing how your designs show up on a mobile device and a computer. So that way throughout your learning process, you're not just seeing mobile devices blown up really big, but you're really understanding sizing, spacing, thumb interactions, all of those things. You'll pick a plan, and depending on your school, you might get maybe get like student access or anything like that. And then you'll also want to join communities. So you'll want to kind of, be a part of things like Medium, Substack, LinkedIn. You'll want to get yourself prepared to start growing your design network so that your LinkedIn and all of your different communities start to be more design and tech related. Now, once you're in school, time management's key. Whether you're teaching yourself or you're being taught or you found some mixture of the two, you'll want to figure out, tips and tricks for managing your time. So once you've started your boot camp and you're in school, you want to figure out, how do you use your calendar to schedule and block your time effectively? Are you working full time while doing this boot camp, or are you solely working on the boot camp? And that's something to really keep in mind in terms of how you where you manage your time. You want to be very self-aware as well, and think about, what are successful past strategies that you've used to avoid burnout, making sure, especially if you're someone who's working full-time and then doing the boot camp on the side, you're really making sure you're practicing self-care and finding those moments of balance so that you don't get yourself to a point where you're so burnt out, so stressed out that you could end up hurting your path forward. You want to make sure you're learning with attention and really concentrate during those productive hours and thinking through. And this is where having a mentor can be really helpful. So using platforms like ADP List or LinkedIn if your program doesn't involve any sort of mentorship, and really leaning on them to help you understand, when's the best time to focus, where to put your effort when, so that you're prioritizing your time effectively. And like I mentioned before, again, joining communities, participating in design meetups. And this is where you can use meetup.com or Eventbrite, thinking about the city that you're in. I know some of you mentioned you're in Colorado. There's the Denver UX. I'm butchering it. I just joined it a week ago. There's a Slack community. There's some design communities. So just spending the time thinking about what's local to my community, or what are virtual events I can attend, so that you're just constantly learning and meeting people and growing your network. And lastly, be kind on yourself. Really, really, really don't be too hard. This is not an easy feat. It's one of those where it can look simple and you're looking on the slide and you're like, cool, good to go. But you'll have, moments of ups and downs. And so it's important to have, a plan in place of how to make sure you keep yourself steady throughout the whole course. So boot camps won't teach you everything. And that's just the nature of a boot camp. It's not the nature of whether one boot camp is better than another. They just cannot squeeze absolutely everything that there is to know about UX into a simple boot camp. But what they're there for is to give you guidance and structure so that you're going through and really learning things in an appropriate time frame and getting that mentorship and getting that feedback, so that you're building a space where you're not just kind of learning in a bubble. So what you want to do when you're in a boot camp is making sure that you're just filling in the gaps and not just relying solely on what the boot camp is giving you in terms of education. So if you're learning about different, wireframing, card sorting, research, things like that, taking advantage of pretty much all of Google at your fingertips. So search and explore multiple sources so that you're staying up to date and just keeping, getting different people's opinions. It's really important to kind of just read through how do different people approach different things, because that can really help you form your own opinions as a designer. You want to leverage different tools and communities as well, using the Figma community, UI kits, enhancing your writing and with Grammarly and things like that. Just really take advantage of all of the little tools out there that will help strengthen your writing skills and all of those things so that you can move at a quicker pace. And you'll want to look at and follow some trusted resources as well. There's, I follow UX Collective on Medium. There's, various mentors and communities. So it's really just making sure that you're seeking out to those that you trust as well, and saying, and using that to kind of help round out your educational experience. All right, so to summarize, get a mentor. Make sure you have some sort of support system. So if you're self-learning, make sure you're reaching out to some sort of platform in some way, shape, or form to get that mentorship, so that you have that feedback and guidance throughout your learning process. Repetition is key. Just doing something once does not mean that you're going to get it. It takes doing multiple projects and learning and building up that knowledge. That repetition is what teaches you pattern recognition, and that's what strengthens your skill set as a designer. Auto layout. It's something that you probably will not remember when you leave this, but you'll remember it when you open up Figma. It's a very, very key tool. It basically really helps you understand how things are really built from a front-end perspective. So it really helps improve engineering collaboration. There's a lot of benefits just in terms of, speeding up your design process, cleaning things up, making sure everything's pixel perfect. But there's the additional added benefit of helping you understand how to work your designs in a way that's sort of close to engineering, but not quite. Search with intention, become a Googling expert, and save everything. Document all your process. Document all your progress. It's gonna be easy for you probably when you're going through just kind of erase over things. Save all of your variations of everything that you do, all of your versions, because you want to be able to document in all of your case studies in your portfolio what your design process was, and you want to show how you got from point A to point B. Portfolio. So lastly, without any past UX roles on your resume, hiring managers need something to help them understand, your designability and how, they really just need to see how you solve problems. And sometimes they can't really just go off of a list of past employers and job descriptions to gauge that, especially if, you're in the point of your resume where it's, maybe you said marketing coordinator and you want to be able to switch it to UX design. Even experienced designers need strong portfolios to get through the door. And so, portfolios, they're really, really key. So why a strong portfolio is important? You really, really need 2 robust case studies to get that first UX role. And when people say, it must be visual appealing, when you're like, what does that even mean? You're going to see 1,000,001 portfolios out there. Some are going to look messy. Some are going to be unique. Some are going to be simple. Some are going to be wild. It's going to be, honestly, probably all over the place, and it's going to be overwhelming. But the key thing is really just making sure you're designing something that people want to look at, and it matches you, your personality, your style. It doesn't need to be fancy. You just want to be able to kind of communicate who you are through your portfolio and make it just super easy to read. Easy to find, easy to find your case studies, easy to understand how you think, what your design process is, all of that stuff. If it kind of looks messy and unappealing, they'll make prejudgments that you wouldn't want them to make. So tips and tricks when working through your portfolio, the biggest thing is focusing on your case studies and your story. It can be easy to kind of see the flashy portfolios and all the crazy things that are coming up, but the most important thing that a hiring manager wants to know is what was your work like? How did you work in a team? How did you solve problems? What was your approach? What are all the different things that you did at each step to get to the end, and what was the impact that brought to your team and to the business? And you really want to focus it on what you did. What was your role in the entire process, especially for when you're in boot camp and you're kind of working on these solo projects where you're not really in a team yet. You always want to kind of imagine how you would approach something if you were actually in a team, working with a product manager and an engineer and all of those things. Take advantage of editing tools like Grammarly, or I'm sure there's 1,000,001 other plugins. Use those, and do not rely on just your ability to know how to, because you're going to be so focused on the designs and the story, you don't want to have to also think about grammar and spelling. Let AI help you. And then when it comes to picking a website or a builder that when you want to ultimately go put it live, you'll want to pick something that really suits your skills best. So dive into a tool where figure out where you're at. If you do not have the HTML coding skills, do not dive into Webflow unless you have the confidence and the patience to dive into Webflow. if you do have all that background, then you can feel really comfortable and safe, going into a more complex tool. So really just think through your skill sets and don't feel like you need to know everything. There's a bunch of different options where that can kind of help level out those skill sets for you. And then share it with a bunch of people. Share it with your friends and your family. Sometimes share it with people who don't know anything about tech or design. They'll ask you all these really interesting questions that'll really help you think about how people are perceiving what you're putting out. And that can really help you, frame your stories, simplify them, all of those things. All right. So lastly is networking. The key thing, and this is something that I learned because more often than not, you're going to have, at the most, you're going to have the most phone screens. Then those are going to get narrowed down to, only so many interviews. Those are only going to get narrowed down to so many case study walkthroughs, et cetera, et cetera. So practicing that elevator pitch, why UX design I found was really, really helpful in just kind of helping the recruiter or the hiring manager, or whoever it is on the phone, help them understand, yes, I know my resume does not say UX designer, UX designer, UX designer of all my past experience, but here's my 30-second elevator pitch of why I'm entering the field of UX design, why I think I'm a strong fit, and what my transferable skills are. And really kind of highlighting, maybe some case studies, things like that. The next thing you want to do obviously is growing your LinkedIn and really just taking advantage of the design communities out there and attending meetups and just growing your network, because even if meeting someone doesn't necessarily lead to a job, just growing that network could lead to a job down the line. It just creating those connections is really critical to just getting your foot in the door, really. And then getting that real world experience as well. So, with boot camps and things like that, more often than not, your project is going to be, it's going to be, made up for lack of a better phrase. You're going to do your best effort to make it seem as realistic as possible, but you might just not have the resources at your fingertips to actually do something that will go live or is, a real live product out in the wild. And so if you want to, build up your portfolio and take on that type of work, the key thing is really seeking out freelance and volunteer projects. There's tons of local businesses, nonprofits, and a bunch of different online platforms where people look for volunteers to help them with their digital products. And so seeing where you can get kind of your foot in the door there is always another way to round out your portfolio, so you're not, focused on just the projects that are made up. All right. And that is it. I am done with my spiel. If you have any questions, there's my email. You can shoot me an email, but I want to open it up to the floor if anyone has any questions. Anything anyone wants to chat about? Oh, I see 3 questions. Wait, I figured it out. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm new to Livestorm. Okay. So this is a question from Carrie. Any suggestions for developing our own voice for our portfolio and our UX work in general, wanting to differentiate from other potential job candidates, but seems like getting too niche could eliminate some job possibilities? Yeah, I would say my suggestions is to be yourself. I think it can be challenging, and you feel this pressure to you have to kind of fill a box. I think what proves to be the most effective is really just being yourself and just write how you naturally would. Something that I found helpful and something that I've advice that I've given other students too is to kind of if it helps to speak out before you write, sometimes that can be really helpful. A lot of times, we went to school, we all went through all our whole life of schooling was right in this way, and we're kind of put in this box. But more often than not, when we just are chatting and having a normal conversation, we explain things more naturally, simpler, and it might just be a much better story than if we just immediately dive to the Word doc or the Figma and start writing in how we think it should sound. So speaking into a voice note or whatever it is that can be helpful to get that natural voice, and even just having someone with you, saying having someone ask you questions and just being able to answer, be oh, well, I did that because of this, I did that because of this, and et cetera, et cetera. And that really helps just really your natural voice shine. And that is more often than not what people want to know. They want to know just how do you think, how do you naturally interact, and how was your brain processing all this information when you put this case study together? Yeah. All right, next question. From Sarah, will I be as competitive with other applicants for a job with a certificate from Google versus a bootcamp like Designlab? I will say just, having, a Google UX certificate probably won't. At the end of the day, it's less about the bootcamp and your certifications. It's the portfolios and your case studies and the projects that you have. So that's really going to be key. If you do like a certificate with Google, that's where you really want to supplement with self-learning and volunteer projects and things like that to really get that background and like build up your base. And programs like Designlab, they're helping you build that base. They're giving you kind of that structure to do that without you having to do all of it on your own. Oh, I was supposed to be clicking start live answer. Okay. How much does industrial design experience, the OG product designers, transfer to a new digital product design role? I have senior level industrial design experience, and I'm wondering how far I can expect to go backwards in order to switch. That's a good question. I don't know as much from people with, I think it all depends on what's the product and the product space that you're applying for and what are they looking for. More often than not, maybe some of the gaps is really just getting into like what's the digital tech space and making sure you're just up to date on new tooling, working with engineers, things like that. But and this is where it's really leaning on your transferable skills. So for having industrial design experience and knowing all of the key product design experience that just comes with that, really leaning on that and using that to your advantage. And then it kind of just comes down to the company, what they're looking for. I will say it definitely does not, I don't think it puts you at the way bottom. But there is something to keep in mind is that even when you don't have that exact experience that someone's maybe looking for a certain role, there will be kind of that gap and you will kind of want to find a way to, still sell yourself, even if there is that gap. So I don't know if I totally answered that question the best, but it's really a hard one to answer, I think. But I think definitely just really honing in on what your transferable skills are and really leaning on those to help sell yourself. Okay. Oh, there's more questions. Okay. Okay. How can we get more experience with case studies if we are how can we get more experience with case designs if we are just starting out? Yes, this is where, boot camps can be helpful. Looking at volunteer sites and looking for different types of projects. I have, and this is where I don't know exactly the names of them off the top of my head, but there's some like UX Rescue. This is where you can go like finding like UX sites for volunteer projects, and just, this is kind of where it's challenging, but reaching out to your network and just diving in as much as possible to see what's out there. So you're just really taking all the experience that you can get. And the more you build on all of that experience, the more your case studies will start to go from there. But not an easy feat. So it's one of those where you have to, that's where networking is really key in putting yourself out there and making yourself known with people so they can find opportunities for you. How did I switch my career? Self-taught with a course. I did General Assembly. So that's, no, I don't, yeah, I probably didn't even say it. So that's my bad. Yeah, so I did, I spent a lot of time Googling and resourcing, or Googling and like figuring out, the pros and cons of all my different options. And I was in a position personally where I was not in a full-time career. I was just freelancing. So I was in a position where I could take out a loan and put, 10 weeks into, boot camp, and I wanted to kind of be spit out and ready to go because I was not working full-time. Some people are working full-time, and programs like Designlab are much more flexible because they don't have to leave their current job in order to go to a boot camp. I was in a position where I had already quit my job months prior, so it didn't even matter. But that was just my unique circumstance. Okay. What can I do to make me different from other UI UX designers when applying to get a job role, maybe at Google, Microsoft, or Apple, or other company in need of UI UX? Great question. I think the key thing is impact. The key thing is being able to prove impact and prove how you were able to transform a product and take something from nothing to something. Those are the key things. It's hard to it can be hard to find those opportunities, but I think definitely where like some of those volunteer spaces or freelancing and things like that can help fill those gaps, and networking. Sometimes it's just networking is the key, and getting yourself known and meeting people and staying, that can really kind of just help kind of like give you that leg up. And then sometimes it's just being yourself. That's enough to get you through the door. Let's see. Okay. What kind of edge could someone who is a data engineer have switching to UX? I often chase novelty. Is that sort of personality we'll try in UX? Totally. I mean, I would say like data engineer, I think anyone coming from a technical background has that leg up of understanding how things are built, how things are analyzed. And you're able to bring that really strong technical knowledge to the design space. And what you're able to transition into UX, you don't necessarily need to be the one solving all the data problems and engineering all the data things, but you're able to like take all those insights and then apply it to design explorations and finding different design solutions. And so it's definitely a switch in the brain, but there's definitely so much value in having that background and that insight, because it makes you a really strong strategic partner. And, any suggestions on where to start when job hunting? Anywhere and everywhere, I would say. I would go to LinkedIn, I would go to all the job boards. This is where, going to like meetups and all of those various events and things like that, it can be really helpful, because that's where you can see, people who work at different companies, find out if they're hiring, things like that. Yeah, LinkedIn's probably like the easiest place to start. It's a good, safe common ground. Most stuff is there. And then you have, the bigger ones, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, all those things. So it's really just a matter of, spreading wide, but then also making sure you're taking advantage of like the networking capabilities of LinkedIn, and then the reviews and like research side of things with like Glassdoor can be really helpful as well. All right. Is there an expectation for a full stack designer to know how to write code? Totally depends. I would say no. You might see some job descriptions where they want someone to be able to touch the code. I would say the more important thing is you understand what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are, and you understand how engineers are going to be using all three of those things to take your static, Figma wireframe and turn it into a live functioning site. That's what's more important. However, what I found helpful, and I did this, I was given like a discount to do one of General Assembly's like coding boot camps for like a part-time course. And so just diving into it and just learning it from scratch was a really great way to just get that like base level knowledge of like, oh, I'm actually understanding how all of these things piece together. You don't need to necessarily have, a deep, extensive knowledge of engineering. You really just need to understand how it all works, so that when you're proposing your designs, you're not proposing designs that are going to take 3 months longer than they have to build. You're thinking through accessibility and all of those things. And you're understanding, if you're working within a design system, you're not breaking the design system and all of that stuff. So yeah, sometimes it's just helpful to like just learn the basics, and that can kind of give you that like foundational knowledge. But I can't say I've seen that many designers need to know how to dive into code. However, when you take a basic class and you kind of can dive into the code, it can be helpful, because then you can like you can inspect your product and the websites, and you can have a little bit more insight into what's going on, at least at a high level. So there is sometimes that benefit. What would you say is the difference between a UX designer and I almost thought that said UX designer and a product designer. I was like, not much. What would you say is the difference between a UX designer and a product manager? So a product manager, they're kind of the ones on the business side of things. At the end of the day, they're the ones that own the experience. They own the success of the product, or the product space, or their feature, or their area, however the team is set up. And so they're the ones kind of managing stakeholder relationships, timelines, roadmaps. They're the ones kind of figuring out like, okay, what's our vision and how do we get ourselves to that vision? And they're spearheading the whole team to kind of get there. And they're working with data and engineering and design to get to the finish line. And the UX designer is very much involved in that like road mapping strategy process. But the UX designer is focused more on how to solve the problem and meet the user needs while also balancing requests coming from the product manager and needs coming from the engineer. So the UX designer is kind of in that like compromised position of, okay, here's all the things the user needs. If it matches, you know, and here's what the product manager is telling me in terms of we need to meet these numbers, meet these deadlines, you know, hit these business goals, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, similar, but very different. Where'd it go? Any suggestions for developing your own? Oh, did I read this already? Oh, you know what? I answered that. Okay, never mind. Oh, there are more questions. Okay, sorry, y'all. Do you recommend including a short summary on your resume if transitioning careers? I'd say totally doesn't hurt. I think the more you can share with people about who you are and what your background is and what you want to bring to the table, I think is always going to be beneficial. And I think that just kind of just helps give people an understanding, especially when they're looking at your resume. You want to be able to explain, you know, like why there's that stark difference in some of your past jobs to now. That can kind of help bridge that gap and give people that like complete story. Is having a blog on your website still a good way to attract attention? It used to be, but I don't know if LinkedIn took over. That's a good question. I don't even know if I know the answer to this one. I say just trust your gut and do what's best for you. I think if you like to blog and you just find joy in it, and that's like, people will see that, and I think that you can get a lot of value out of it if it's something that you want to do. But I wouldn't feel too much pressure. I think the key thing is really networking and just making sure you're growing your network and meeting people and participating in the community. And everyone has their own, I think, path of how they participate. Some people are the more extroverted, vocal. They like to, you know, share all their things, you know, so everyone has, I think, their own path. So if blogging's your thing and you love it and it's totally up your alley, then I would say just stick to what you know. Or you can go to, if LinkedIn's where everyone's heading, you can head to LinkedIn. Hopefully that was a helpful answer. I really don't even know. The world is changing faster than I think anyone can keep up. All right. I've noticed that many mid-level people coming into UX go into UX research. I'm leaning this way too. Do you know a good place to find UXRs to talk with for informational interviews? Do you know any experienced UXR? Good question. At my Gusto right now, we do have a user research team. So you can always, poke around on LinkedIn. They're all really, really strong, super sweet designers. I would say a good place to find UXRs is probably going to be thinking through what are companies that have big enough design teams where they have a UX research arm. And this is where you can kind of go to LinkedIn and kind of start searching like people with UX research titles and things like that. And that's how you can kind of maybe see where people actually have, where they're in a role where there's enough designers to go around to create that niche. And so more often than not, just might be the more experienced or the bigger companies and maybe less like the startups. So for a good place, it's probably just like thinking through what are companies that have those bigger design teams, and that can be a way to do it as well. And there might be, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can only imagine that UX researchers have formed their own niches and communities and Slack groups. So it's probably, I'll Google and just spend a bunch of time Googling what are all the different, how do UX researchers network and meet up? And then that's how you can kind of get to know a bunch of them and do those informational interviews and stuff like that. All right, is it possible to make a career change from the medical field to UI UX? Of course, totally. I mean, the amount of, actually, it's funny enough, like I was, when I watch doctor shows or like shows that take place in hospitals, I see so much correlation with like the doctors, the nurses, and the surgeons. Like the surgeons are so much like the engineers. They know how, they want to just get in there. They know how it works. They want to, very technical. And then you have the doctors who are empathetic, strategic, deep diving, and on all of that stuff. And then you have your nurses who are kind of like your project managers, your product managers, things like that. And then you have your heads of your director level people. And those are usually your product managers kind of guiding the overall decisions to making sure the hospital stays running. So yeah, there's so many similarities. And I think it totally just depends on, I think, what your experience is, and it's really finding what those transferable skills are. It's thinking through, what are your strengths? Like, what are the things that you were doing in your day-to-day job in the medical field that you can translate to tech and digital? And a lot of that can kind of come from that strategic thinking, problem solving, collaboration, communication, balancing a bunch of different priorities. All of those things are all very, very relevant. Will the recording be sent out? I believe it will be. It is recording, and I believe if you signed up, you should get an email. I hope so. I don't 100% know. All right, we have 5 minutes left. I don't want to keep you all too long. If anyone has any other questions, my email's there. Free to shoot me an email. But yeah, I want to thank you all for joining, and hopefully you feel a little bit less stressed about the field of UX, and you have at least a little bit of a guide to kind of like figure out, how to approach what that career switch could look like for you. So yeah, I want to thank everyone. Feel free, if you want to share your LinkedIns in the chat and connect with some people, feel free. And I'll put my email here, or my LinkedIn, sorry. I'll put my LinkedIn. So feel free to connect. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining. Hope everyone has a good morning and a good rest of your day. You're very welcome. All right, I will let you all go. Have a great day. If you have any issues with the recording, reach out to Designlab, and they should be able to help you if you do not get it. Bye, everyone.